So welcome back to the second part. So the Cathars fled, and you can again see it in this card of the Fool. We already talked about the Fool. Now here you have the Fool in a little bit different aspect. The Cathars fled, so they had to leave everything behind. That's why the Fool doesn't have anything with him except his bag and his lineage. His lineage is basically his family history, because we are defined by our traditions and beliefs of over generations. So that's a little bit what that represents. An important and interesting point of this is that the trousers that he wears is actually color of the flesh. So it should be the other way around. You should have the flesh here and trousers in fabric. Here it's the other way around. What does that mean? That means that the Cathars had to disguise themselves as normal people. So they had to put an artificial flesh on them, a new flesh on them. And again, it's the Fool because they could continue to talk about their truth without being taken seriously, basically enough to kill them. Let's say that way. So yeah, you can see that in that card. I think that's very interesting. Now, where did they flee to? Lots of them fled, for instance, to Italy, because in Italy there were sympathizers. There were other groups who were quite opposed to the church as well. One of them, we know about the Visconti family, Visconti Sforza family. The Visconti family lived in Milan, and Milan became, in the 15th century, a center of manufacturers of game cards. The cards arrived in Europe with the Arabs at some point, I think in the 14th or 13th century. I don't know exactly. They were introduced, card games were introduced around that time, and the Visconti family started to produce also card decks. At the beginning there were only the 4 suits, like we know, and then you have the king and the queen and then the page and the knight, like the normal playing cards that you would know from today as well. The Visconti family, though, was the first one in 1450, around that date, to create the 22 major arcana. So there are 22 cards on top of the normal games, who had messages that nobody really knew how to use, because, well, how do you play a game with those 22 cards on top? We don't really know how and why. It is believed, though, that the philosophy of the Cathars continued living throughout the centuries, because here we are talking about 150 years after the last perfects were exterminated at the beginning of the 14th century. So it wasn't the Cathars themselves, it wasn't the same people who had to flee that actually created the cards, but their beliefs continued to be alive in those societies or in those groups, and the Visconti family started to do that. That was a kind of weird. The funny thing, though, is that, of course, we are here in a very different type of deck. Those cards were handmade, so it was kind of a fashion at that time, like a trend to have your own game, but then there were portraits of family members, so, you know, why not? Very funny to have your own cards, picturing Granny and the cousin. So you can see here also it is very inspired. I'm not sure, it's blurry, maybe a little bit. The Empress, you have the Hermit. You can also see the influence of the Renaissance in those decks. I mean, they're quite beautiful. They're quite small cards because I don't really use them. I have them because there's a proper historian of the tarot, and well, not historian, that's a bit too much, but I'm very interested in that, and so I do have those decks, but I mean, they're very tiny. I just have them to have them. Yeah. Actually, there is a card that I wanted to show you. I forgot. It is the card of the lovers from the Visconti game. You can actually see the marriage between the Visconti and the Lady Sforza. So definitely family portraits here. Now you can see actually that they're very different, those decks. So this is more medieval, this is more Renaissance, those are from the 15th century. Decks like these, or similar to these, have been found in the 17th century or 18th century. For example, Conver is one that's very well known, and then there's also the Carey Yale deck, which is now in the University of Yale, though they are not single cards. It's like a big card board or something like that. Yeah, so people were looking for symbolisms of the medieval times, for instance, to kind of reconstruct all that, taken from the Conver game, from the Carey Yale game as well, and to reconstruct that. So what I have here today is a reconstructed one. You can find it in different, different ones. You have the ones from Camoin and Jodorowsky. You have this one, for instance, is from a school called Les Maths, and there are many others. The differences are very, very tiny. So after all that, why is it called the Tarot de Marseille, not the Tarot of Milan, of course, or Tarocchi? I think the Italian word is, the original word is Tarocchi. Well, at some point, this part of Italy was invaded by French, 15th, 16th century, something like that. And so this is how we believe the cards came back to France, and yeah, so nobody really knows. Actually, nobody really knows anything about the tarot. They're all beliefs, they're all theories. Right. After that, you have, of course, occultism coming into the cards, because it was heresy, because it was something, we don't talk about. It became something mystical, and therefore, the evolution of that coming into this thing of the tarot where everyone is scared of and mystical and so on. So you would have then the Rider-Waite deck, for instance, in 1910, I think it was created, but the occultism was already starting in the 19th century and so on. You have also Carl Jung, who took the tarot quite seriously. He believed that there were archetypes. So everyone in one same culture, though, has an idea of what the Pope represents, or the Emperor. Everyone knows what an Emperor is. Yeah, everyone knows what death represents. Everyone has an idea of a mother, of an empress. A mother. What is a mother? A mother is either, protection, love, selflessness, and on the other hand, it is the mother who chokes her children. So we have those ideas. Cultural ideas, and this is how we can communicate through the cards with each other. And they also represent this mirror of your unconsciousness. So if I see this, I can either go, oh, I don't like that, or I can say, oh yeah, that's freedom for me. So there is kind of a mirroring there as well. Very important. Yeah, so this is a little bit how the tarot evolved, and then of course you have now a lot of people drawing their own decks. So you have a tarot, a fox tarot, or you have a animals of the sea tarot. You have the Egyptian tarot. You have so many people just create their art and use the major arcana for that. I pretty much like the original one, and I'm going to explain it to you in another video why. Yeah. Now there is one question that is very interesting, is why actually do card games? Why, why put your history and your philosophy in card games? Well, very simply, because you wouldn't destroy them. it's just a card game, you know. Nobody would actually think straight away that they were telling a story. Yeah, so they wouldn't get destroyed like the books did, and so on, any written trace of them, as I said before. So that's one thing. The other thing is obviously that many people couldn't read back then either, so they are just pictures, so people would just have to look at the pictures and understand those symbols to actually understand the history. And another point is, of course, that was provocation as well, or it's meant to be, or it's believed to be provocation as well. There's a lot of heresy in those cards. That's why, ooh, you know, the church kind of mystified that and didn't like that. So there's, for instance, here the Pope, the simple presence of the Pope in a gambling tool in a card game is an offense. So that's one point. However, they say though that the Pope was introduced in the major arcana much later, so it's not so sure that it was actually that. Then you have in the numerology, or say in the, you see that? In the order of the cards, you have the first card, the second card, the third one. You have the fourth, which is the Emperor, and you have the fifth card, which is the Pope. Now, you can see here the 4 is not written like normal. You don't have the 5 - 1. That has a good reason, though. That means that for the Cathars, there was no minus. There was no regression possible. It was only evolution possible. So it was impossible to have a 5 - 1. You had to have 4 strikes because there is no regression. There's only evolution. Now, when you put the 2 cards back to back, like this, the Pope and the Emperor are back to back. So that also shows that opposition between the Cathars and the church. That's one thing. Another thing, for instance, is the world. So what your soul should get or aim, basically the salvation of the soul, the unconditional love, position of the Christ. However, it's a woman. So again, yeah, against the church. Then we have, for instance, also that card, which is very interesting. You have here 2 dogs fighting. That's the moon, the card of the moon. Now you have here the blue dog, which is actually a wolf, because the Cathars were said to be wolves because they were quite ferocious. They were not the nice people either. I mean, we're still in medieval times, so people, you know, slaughtered each other for nothing, or almost nothing. You have here, for instance, that card of death, representing also what the Cathars did with their enemies. There's a story in the book where they explain that they captured soldiers or whatever from the church. They would cut off their lips. That's why death doesn't have lips. They would cut off their noses, and they were taking out the eyes. They only left one eye of one person, so that this person could lead the group back home to show the others what happens to them if they attack the Cathars. So it wasn't that nice either. Coming back to this card. So you have on this side the wolves, and on the other side you have the dogs of God. Dogs of God were the Domini Cani. So the Domini Cani, the dogs of God. The Dominicans were actually on the side of the church, the very not nice ones. And so you can see this fight there as well. Yeah, and many more, many more. But I think I made my point. And I hope you liked it. I hope I motivated you to read the book. It's very interesting. Otherwise, if you want, we can make different videos also, card by card, but maybe later on. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.